Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading the charge. Shipping is built on risk, not just insurable risk, but operational risk, human risk, and increasingly digital risk. Some of it is obvious when things go wrong. Much of it sits quietly in the background, shaping decisions long before an incident ever occurs. One of the places where all that risk converges is insurance, and more specifically, the P&I clubs. They're essential to how shipping functions, yet often misunderstood or rarely talked about outside of claims and renewals. My guest today is Thomas Nordberg, CEO of the Swedish Club. Thomas brings a clear, practical view of how risk in shipping is changing, how insurers are adapting, and what ship owners may need to rethink as expectations shift in 2026 and beyond. This conversation is less about policies and premiums and more about how the industry manages risk in the real world and how digitalization and social media change the way clubs and owners manage that risk. Thomas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for having me. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. And again, it's definitely one of these areas that we don't talk about a lot. It sits in the background. But before we get into all that, talk a little bit about your background, about your career, and kind of how you ended up in the maritime insurance space and ultimately at the Swedish Club.
So, I've been in the industry now for almost 30 years. My background is I was practicing as a lawyer in private practice, and also including doing some time in the Swedish court system before joining one of our Norwegian marine insurance competitors in '97. Then I was working for that company for 25 years in different management positions in Scandinavia, in Asia, and then London. And then I finally took my poor family back home to Sweden, Gothenburg, and joined a law firm for a very short stint before I was offered the position as the CEO of the Swedish Club, which I joined autumn 22, CEO of the club in January 23. And also I can mention that my first proper marine insurance job was actually as a trainee with the Swedish Club in the summer of 92. And then it took me 30 years to come back to the Swedish Club. But now I'm happy to be here.
That's a great evolution story there, kind of making your way around and having some practical experience. I think one of the things that people love to hear about is talk a little bit about how risk and in shipping from the time that you've been there, how has it changed, over like you said, the 30 plus years in the shipping side of the industry? How has that changed, and how has things started to adopting to that change, and not just digital, but just in general from a risk point of view?
I think, my 30 years now in the industry, it's been quite a shift in that previously it was, in the good old days, it was more of around the vessel, more event driven. Now it's much more about systemic risks. And that means that our role as an insurance company also has changed quite a lot. Now it's very much about understanding as soon as possible exactly what goes on out in global society. We have rapid developments now on the regulatory side. The geopolitics is making a big impact on the daily environment for our ship owning clients, and lots of other things. And that means that we have a totally different risk picture to look at today. And again, our job is to make sure that we provide the best possible services for our members, reflecting the need they have at every time. So I think it's been a substantial change in the risk picture, and also reflecting on how we operate as marine insurance companies.
I think one of the more interesting things you mentioned there is just generally the geopolitical risk. When I was studying kind of the different risk factors, counterparty risk, lending risk, very rarely did you think about country risk in the context of today. And now you have to think about, am I going to get a tariff? Am I going to be involved in a retaliatory tariff? I think it's a real fascinating thing that what was kind of a dormant risk, and if you listed it out, like let's say on an exam, country risk, at the time, maybe it was Syria or Iran or Cuba, North Korea. It was kind of the obvious ones at the time. Now it's not so obvious. And I think that that's definitely an interesting change that has affected international trade.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And also it goes so quickly. I mean, things could change substantially just over the weekend. And I think that's something that our ship owning members needs to be prepared for. And that also means that we, in order to do our job and provide the best possible service to our members, need to understand exactly what kind of need they have and will have as soon as possible. So it's it's all about sleeping with one eye open now, much more than perhaps in the past, and it's a totally different ballgame nowadays. It's complex. We also try to see this as, it's normally being described and perceived as challenges and perhaps also as threats, but from our point of view as service providers, we also try to have a positive mindset around this and try to see ways to add values and do more and better for our members. So in a way, sort of, there will be more space for doing good and provide more service. And that's the mindset we must have, I think, in our capacity as the partner, the insurance partner to our members.
And that brings me, so we've kind of talked about risk in general. I'd love to get how you would describe at a cocktail party, not involving shipping people, or maybe with shipping people like myself that have a general idea. Talk a little bit about what does the P&I clubs do? How do they work? You talked a little bit about the relevancy about, being there for your members and helping them understand that risk. How does it, as it say in Americanism, where the rubber hits the road, or maybe something similar in Swedish, I don't know. But I'm really curious because when I was in school, we learned that in shipping had three big buckets: an operational bucket, a finance bucket, and an insurance bucket. And I remember a professor told me very specifically, you're usually an expert in one, you know a little bit about something else, and there's one you know nothing about. And from my own experience, I think I'm pretty much an expert or close enough on the chartering operation side. I know a little bit to be dangerous with finance, and I know zero about insurance. So educate me as somebody who knows zero about insurance about what you do for your clients.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, to keep this, to try to summarize it, we as a uh, P&I Club today, we operate on a mutual basis. So that's one of the most important features of our business model. That means that we are owned and run by the members. We have ship owners on our board, and the same goes for all the other P&I clubs. And that means that we also have this kind of more long-term and sustainable relationship with the clients. So they are not in it for the short term. We have this kind of more sort of longer-term vision when it comes to the way we cooperate and also the way we develop our products and provide services. So I think that's one of the strengths with this system. I think also I should also mention that we have one other very important part of the mutual P&I Club system is that today we have 12 different clubs that are being members of the international group of P&I clubs. And that system is also very valuable because it means that we have certain elements of that cooperation, which includes a claims pooling arrangement, meaning that the clubs share the larger claims cost according to certain criteria. We also have a collective reinsurance arrangement, which provides competitive upsides. And then we also have lots of exchange of information, expertise, and so on, which in the end will be for the benefit of the members. So I think coming back to what we discussed in the beginning here about the increasingly complex environment that we all are part of, I think that puts us in a position where we are very well suited to handle any upcoming changes and rapid developments or challenges in a way that perhaps not many other commercial insurance companies are in a position to do. So, there are lots of other things to be said about the P&I Club and the mutual system, but I think that's some of the most important ones. I should also mention that our job is basically to handle all the risks for the members that come up in connection with the operation of the ships. So that's sort of, we are quite focused on that. But then we also see that sort of task has become much more complex now as things around us has evolved, and we just expect that to continue.
So this is a little bit different than the hull. Let's say if something happens with the hull or the machinery, that's a different part of the insurance. What you're talking about are things like a cargo owner makes a claim because a cargo got contaminated, or you were short, 10% of a bunch of rice or bags of rice in a certain discharge port. Or I guess the other part operationally, I would imagine, is covering slips and falls and other injuries.
Yeah, that's some good examples and exactly right. What we talk about when we discuss P&I is that's the central liability insurance in the maritime industry, and then you have hull and machinery on the other side, which is the property insurance covering values of the ship. So the two different things and insurance classes.
Right, right. And I think that that's where people get a little bit on the confused side. I guess. And then the third part is cargo insurance, which is really what the insurance that the cargo owners take out on things like contamination. But then if something happens, then the cargo insurance comes after the P&I club, I guess is probably the most simplest way of saying it.
Yeah, and the cargo insurance is also kind of property insurance, whereas P&I is just about liability, which also adds to the flavor that it becomes even more complex because, again, it's all about assessing large liability claims, which sometimes can be quite become very complex and involving lots of different aspects that makes it very interesting for a lawyer.
Yeah, and I guess that's why when I run into people for P&I clubs, half of them are lawyers, or half of them are ship captains and
Yeah.
or chief engineers. I mean, that's generally who you see doing that. Not 100%. I was at an event the other day, and there was a few different clubs there, and most of them are lawyers.
But that's also, I'm not sure if you want me to talk about that now, but when you mention sort of the professionals that commonly in the P&I clubs, there have been lots of lawyers and also people from the sea. But now as things become a bit more complex and our business is developing in different directions, there will also be a need now for other competencies to make sure we can provide all the services and the expertise that we have discussed. So on green tech side, on the digitalization side, it is not sort of exactly the same thing to hire people today compared to how things were 25 years ago. It's a difference actually, and it becomes more complex.
And kind of moving into that. So yeah, talk a lot about some of the changes in the risk profile, because before you mentioned kind of when you started a little bit beyond 10 years ago, 30 years ago, kind of when I started in the industry, it was reaction to a slip and fall, a reaction to, again, bags of rice being, having weevils in it or something like that, or a tank of oil, getting cross contaminated. But you get the idea, and that became an issue. Talk a little bit about some of those concerns that we see today that are different. I mean, those still exist. You still have those things, but how is the plate expanded? Because I really think your last statement of kind of hiring different people is an interesting take.
I think there are lots of examples of this, but just to highlight some of the most important ones, I think risk driven by geopolitics is, we have talked about tariffs, but there are sanctions, there are many other consequences that will impact the daily operations of our members. And then you have the green tech developments that could also mean lots of new risks and potential claims for the members and the clubs. And yeah, so I mean, there are quite a lot of different things now that we didn't have to deal with in the past, and I think obviously that means different things. Again, it means for us, it means that we need to make sure we have the competence and resources to handle it. And yeah, perhaps also I should mention on the regulatory side, I think we have rapid developments that means a lot to the members, but also for the club. So, I mean, our job is to obviously primarily to focus on the members, but then obviously we need to make sure that we have what we need in terms of competences to also protect the club in relation to regulatory authorities, and that's become much more of a burden today for the entire finance industry than compared to some years back. And also now looking at the way we operate, because today we are an international organization with licenses in different jurisdictions. And that means also that we have to make sure that we have everything in place, and that also looking at the quick and rapid developments of regulatory requirements. So yeah, it's I would say it's if you look 10 years back or 30 years back, it's a big difference, and things tend to happen now with a pace that we haven't really seen in the past.
Before we get into digitalization, one of the things that's kind of layered on that is access to social media, maybe not in and around a particular incident, but maybe even just in the background, that all of a sudden gives a different view of a claim. Talk about kind of your feeling on that, because I think that social media in shipping in general is very interesting. When we had the CEO Joseph Farrell on, CEO of one of the salvage companies, and they were involved in the Dolly incident, on recovery of that. Obviously, not in the incident itself, but of the recovery. There were people on scene as it happened, and all the social media channels that were maybe filming something else that caught what happened. How does a club view that social media? And then what advice do you have to ship owners? Because on the one hand, you always want to control the narrative. On the other hand, I always put this thing, you don't necessarily control the narrative with people in their home lives and at the office. So how do you give advice on that? And how's that outlook and impacting on kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's also something that become increasingly vital for the ship owners and for us as a P&I club. We can just see now that when things happen, when you have, let's say you have a fire on board a vessel or some other similar incident, you can just expect and anticipate that will be out online within minutes. Regulators, other sort of concerned stakeholders will be on the ball very quickly. And this means many different things. I think one thing, it triggers a need for having a very efficient sort of emergency response in place. It also triggers a need for efficient communication around this. So I think we have to be very much aware of this risk, and also to make sure that we can provide the best possible service and support to the members when things like this happen. That's one of the effects of social media. There are obviously good sides of social media as well. So when it comes to communication and interaction between us and the market and our members, I think there are lots of potential where we can, and also ways for us to benefit mutually from social media. But when it comes to reputational risks involved in certain incidents, it's a fact, and it's here to stay. And it's all about making sure that we are prepared and that we support our members best possible in that kind of context.
I think it's completely a industry-wide, I don't even want to say it's not a problem. It just, like you said, it's here to stay. And how you manage it, whether it's a risk or whether it could be driven as a positive thing. I mean, if you get down to the seafarer levels, having communication via satellite communication and being able to handle mental health issues a little bit more frequently and better. Obviously, that's an upside, but there's other downsides, and certainly that's what ship owners have been really dealing with and looking at on the forefront for the last, I think, kind of in that time frame that you mentioned, the last 5 years, it's really accelerated.
But what you mentioned now is extremely important, because we are, as the other clubs now, very much focused on crew well-being and crew welfare. And that's in that context, sort of looking at what makes the crew feel good and what makes them feel bad. I think the social context with family members, for instance, is a very important part of this. And then that's one very good example of where social media can really play a very positive role, and also be very supportive of the needs of the ship owners crew. And that's something we also try to support and promote as far as possible. So that's one very good example of where social media can really play a important role in a positive context, I would say.
Yeah, and positive context, and then I think on the lighter side, people that give a positive image for shipping, because if you just go to any conference anywhere and crewing comes up, it's going to be a problem. It is a problem, certainly here in the United States, in terms of crew, and it's similar elsewhere around the world. So using social media as a positive tool for ship owner recruiting crew and staff is also something to look forward to, and not necessarily push back,
No,
get the
definitely
negative
agree.
impact, let's say.
I think we should just agree that there are lots of upsides with social media and digitalization, generally speaking. So it's all about finding the angles to make the best possible use of it.
Right. And sometimes other things will happen. And I guess that just gets into more of, emergency preparedness or a response. And that's where you come in and work with the owners and other stakeholders. Pivoting a little bit to the digital transformation. Shipping, the tongue in cheek, the name of the podcast is The Last Dinosaur. Insurance is part of it, been around for as long as shipping, I'm sure. How have you guys approached digital transformation? And second question to that, you can answer it all together. How is it received by your members? Because I'm sure on one half you have the lawyers, right, who are generally going to be risk adverse and always look at that. But on the other half of digital transformation in the same office are maybe younger staff, charterers, operators who are really embracing digital tools for their use. So I'm really curious to see how you're approaching it and how it's being received for your counterparts at the owning side.
It's a big question because digitalization could be so many different things. I think one thing it means that we are given opportunities to interact with the membership and the market in a more efficient and a much more positive manner. But then also for us, it means that it opens up ways to analyze the data that we have, the incident data that has been built up over decades. I think we can now, with the digital tools that we have, we can do analytical work that hasn't really been possible in the past. And that means that we move from being more reactive to much more proactive in terms of loss prevention and what we can do in that area. So I think there are lots of opportunities for us as we approach digitalization as an opportunity to do more and better for the membership. I think that's also one of the changes of our role and function, that we are moving from more reactive to something more of an insurance and risk partner, based on the fact that we now can offer loss prevention advice and support in a way that we didn't do in the past. So less sort of focus on just paying claims and now more focus on preventing claims and incidents from happening, based on much more solid analytical work based on digital tools that we haven't seen in the past. So I think that's another sort of positive way for us to make good use of digitalization. And I expect that our industry have not really been seen as the forefront when it comes to tech developments, and I don't think we expect to be that in the future either. But we have certainly discovered now that there are many ways for us to do more and better in relation to the members by way of becoming more sophisticated in the way we use digital tools. And I think all of us now are looking for innovation in this area. We are looking for new, cooperation partners, external experts that can provide stuff that we didn't even know to ask for. So I think there are so many opportunities now that are out there, and we have to be very curious when it comes to looking for these opportunities. And again, talking about competence that we recruit for the future, I think that's one area where we haven't been that active in the past as a P&I club, but now that's people that can really make a difference. Is that category? So, yeah, very interesting area. I could talk for hours about that.
One of the more interesting things, you bring up the data, right? So you have all this data, and now you're able to be loss prevention. Question I have for you is $1 million question: is are you starting to figure out how to use AI in order to do this? Because kind of the obvious statement is you build for your clients based on their data that's walled off from other people's data, tools that can help them specifically assess risk. A tanker owner is going to be different from a ferry operator, is going to be different from a break bulk operator. Is that something that's kind of maybe not on your radar per se, but are you seeing that permeate, or at least being asked questions by your client base about the use of AI in
I think we and the entire industry, all our peers, including ourselves now, we are definitely looking at opportunities to do more and better by way of using and integrating AI. So we are now running quite a few different projects where we try out and see how we can achieve more and better by way of using AI. So this is also here to stay. And it's all about adjusting and making sure that you benefit from it as far as possible. But again, we are quite cautious and disciplined in this. There are lots of different angles to keep in mind as you develop sort of AI tools and start using it also in external directions. But it's impossible not to be interested in AI. It's part of what we do. It's here to stay, definitely. So lots of focus on that, and I think there is so much potential. It's still early days for our industry in that respect, but I see lots of potential here. So very interesting.
one of the things too that you advise your clients on, and actually it's an actual question, Do you guys fit in on the cyber risk side? Is that something that you advise on, or do companies look at cyber risk as a completely another subset of insurance, or is because it is I would view it as cyber liability kind of fits into your purview. How do you approach the cyber risk of that? Again, if you talk about AI, then you talk about getting what do they call that when it hallucinates? I mean, it would be a claim, so you would probably it's not. I don't think anything. Well, I guess it could be a preventative action, but you don't want a hallucinating AI to give some sort of weird thing. But on the same token, cybersecurity, certainly is something that I think all ship owners have to look at. Some are at more risk than others, given that how old their equipment is and how often they upgrade and hygiene, IT hygiene of their company. And with the prevalence of bad actors potentially targeting ships, we have the Houthis that are physically targeting ships, but could that we have a situation where it's more cyber side? Is that a space that you operate in, or is that something that's a little separate?
I think again, we have talked about digitalization, we have talked about AI, and that's here to stay and will just continue to take off. As part of that, we can also expect that there will be increased exposure cyber criminality, and that's also here to stay. And it will just become more and more important going forward. And we have also been very active on innovation, on the innovational side, and trying to see how we can sort of match the rapidly upcoming needs from our members. We have released now a product covering cyber exposure 2 years ago, which is now one of the leading products in the market in this area. So yes, we are definitely focused on that, and that product will continue to develop, sort of reflecting the changing needs. But yeah, it's a really good example of something which is very important, and will just hand in hand with the booming digitalization and AI evolution. Cyber criminality will continue just to take off, I think.
Not only just from a practical operational point of view, but then you get into the cyber side of digital and IP. What is your digital IP? And it's a very interesting. The risks aren't getting smaller; they're actually getting bigger. And I think that that's kind of where it's interesting from your point of view. Is it's more and more liability risk. Yeah, you're going to have more hull and machinery, maybe a wind assist, or maybe whether it's scrubbers or using alternative fuels. Those things are changing for that different part of the overall insurance market. But what you're doing just seems to be bearing a lot of the burden, you and all the clubs.
I think we do this in tight partnership with the members, because again, our job is to take care of their needs, and that reflects what goes on in society and in the industry. So cyber is one good example, and I'm sure there will be innovation in other areas as well. That again, I think it will be very much reflecting the rapid developments on the digitalization side, and you have some other areas that we have talked about. That will also impact the way we continue to develop now the coming years, decade perhaps, and it will be very interesting eyes. It's a very interesting years and interesting time to come, definitely.
Yeah, because I think you're going to have one department of ex-seafarers, and one of my good friends from college works for one of your competitors, sits in New York, and he's, chasing down bags of corn or whatever in West Africa. I mean, it's really interesting. But I think, like you mentioned, you're going to have somebody who maybe comes from, in the cybersecurity parlance, a white hat background of being able to look at cyber criminality. Again, agnostic, but they drift into
Yeah.
maritime. And
Yeah.
I think that that's going to be really interesting as you evolve. And that's my question. My next question is, winding back to where you were 30 years ago, and myself too, and looking at, convincing the younger version of yourself today to get into the P&I clubs. Again, a little more opaque. Yes, okay, now we kind of have a good base to work off of. But how would if you have somebody coming in, maybe an intern or somebody, maybe in the industry as a lawyer or in the industry as a sailor, or maybe not in the industry, what would you say to that person? Like, hey, this is not only a great career now, but boy, it could be kind of cool. Yes, it's insurance, but it still may be cool.
Sorry, do you mean like what I would have said 30 years ago, or
Well,
what?
what would you say today if you were younger again?
No, I think today there are so many things going for our industries. I mean, if you're, let's say that you are a lawyer, if you are interested in really complex legal topics and tasks and challenges, combined with the opportunity to operate in a global environment, together with working together with highly educated and fascinating people, dealing and taking care of the very sophisticated, sometimes demanding members and clients and ship owners, dealing with tough expectations from regulators, and I think there are so many things going for it. And sometimes I wonder, why don't people discover this? I mean, everybody should be shouting for opportunities to work in my line of business, I think. But, it's a totally fascinating industry to work in. And I haven't sort of regretted one day since joining the business 30 years ago. So I feel blessed to have been offered this opportunity to work for the companies I've done. And I normally try to convince people to join the business. So whenever I get the chance, I'm singing this song for them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had the opportunity to mentor somebody who's finishing up his education at one of the maritime schools here in the U.S. And it started when he graduated high school. He graduated my oldest daughter. And I remember saying to him, long story, but I said, hey, I'm happy to help you out. I will help you get through the first couple of years of school, which the first year is kind of, military-esque and it's difficult. But I said, trust me, at the end of the road, there's going to be so many opportunities. You're not going to know what to do yourself. And
No.
he's at the end of the road of his education now and kind of talking about different opportunities. He spent last summer with one of your competitors in New York and enjoyed that. So we were able to kind of guide him there. And I think it's great. I think it's incumbent on the people who are in the industry to mentor a little bit. I think that's super important. And that's just the way I feel about it. As we wrap up, I love to ask this question. You're a CEO on the go, visiting clients, maybe in Sweden, maybe beyond. What do you throw in the backpack? Or if you're a Kindle guy or a briefcase or just at home, you like to read. I got to read a little more. Sometimes I doom scroll a little bit too much at night, but just putting that aside, I'm trying to read. What about yourself, Thomas?
So I'm a big fan of biographies, and so I try to look for interesting people to read about. Right now, I've started up reading about Anthony Hopkins, the actor. And so that's one good example. Slightly rough start on this one, but I will certainly give it a chance before. But I think he's a fascinating person, and I normally try to look for the opportunity to read about interesting people, fascinating people, about learning more about their life story, and what I can pick up even more about them. So I think that's one category of books I would normally go for. But then I'm interested in history and lots of other things as well. So
one of my favorite biographies I ever read was written, I think it's by Meacham, of John Adams.
All right.
John Adams, you got Washington, I think it's Jefferson. Yes, it's U.S. centric, but Adams, was interesting. It was just, there was so much stuff there that I had, I was embarrassed to say I didn't know, right?
No.
And I'll give away the end, but it's because he and Jefferson died on the 4th of July, 50 years after the founding of the U.S., within hours of each other. And they were separate. Jefferson was in Virginia and Adams was up in Massachusetts. And I was reading the book. It was like a furious read at the end of this. Like, it felt almost fiction, but it was such a good read. And I agree with you. Biographies, you can learn a lot from the person.
Yeah, fascinating story.
Absolutely. Well, Thomas, this was fantastic. Thank you for pulling back the covers a little bit on the P&I clubs, what you're doing, how you're adapting and adopting, and kind of what you're looking out for in the future, because I think it's going to be the insurance industry is going to be really interesting, especially in our space. And I don't know if you hear that too often. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Really appreciate this discussion. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.